Well, good morning, Fairfax. Good to see you all. And thank you for Micah for leading today's worship, for Jason for his thoughts on communion, and for Rick for saying there's always a surprise coming. I always feel like you're one sermon away from your last sermon, so you always go big. And today was no different. I'm sure there's something in here that I didn't even plan for. And definitely Deborah did not plan for interpreting, so we'll see how that goes. How much time do we spend with our family? Does our time devoted with family reflect a priority for God and His family? And how is our time spent with the family used to glorify God? These are all things that we'll be exploring today. And believe me, it's not lost on me that we've sent a lot of our men camping. And my own brother chose his reunion at West Point over being here with me. So it's a lot of family time that won't be spent. But we will smile and we'll press on. I'm sure, again, he is watching online. Good morning, David. I believe it's best to express, when we talk about time, to talk about quality time. We can spend time with someone, correct? And not really spend time with them. You can be in the same room and then not really be with them. Some observations that I've got from the Word this morning as I stand before you, and every day I try to be a better husband and father, friend and mentor, and these are some of the things that I've found about spending quality time with one another, not only as a family, but as an extended family, as a church family, and these are some of the things that I'd like to talk to you about today. And to give attention to those types of things will equal retention. In other words, the time we spend with those we hold dear, children, again, our extended family and adopted family, these will be retained by them and repeated. So it turns out that I'm uniquely qualified, I think, to talk about spending time with our family here at Fairfax. Having been a member here for now 32 years, I've roughly been in touch with about 100,000 people coming through our doors. And that's something that I hold dear to me. So family is important to God and the Word. And the terms family and especially household, the term household is used over 114 times over 106 verses, and they hold great weight in the Bible. And it's not meant to be limited to your immediate family. The term family is used broadly to describe a family house, a tribe, a race, and a nation. And in the Old Testament, family was essential to the growth of the early church. And in the New Testament, we'll see Jesus, he spent a lot of time and sent his apostles to focus on households as he did in Matthew 10. And there's early examples, of course, in worship consisting of breaking bread in households. You'll see that in Acts 2, in Acts chapter 5, and Acts chapter 12. And then churches met regularly in homes as well. The family is a proving ground for church leaders, for church overseers who should model marital faithfulness, hospitality. And it's a place where we can practice and refine parenting skills and other skills, talking about how we spend our time with each other. So I'd first like to look at a passage in Ephesians. And this speaks a good deal about the unity of people among diverse peoples and why we should spend time with each other and how we should conduct ourselves in church, in the home, and in our world. Now you'll see in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 14 through 19, if you'd like to turn with me there, Ephesians chapter 3, starting in verse 14, you'll see Paul has just talked about his calling and his ministry as an apostle, not only to the Jews, but to the Gentiles. And you'll see that this special section here is named or subtitled, A Prayer for Spiritual Strength. And I think it holds something that's really special in looking at the ingredients for being able to notice how spending time with each other manifests itself in quality time. We'll start with verse 14. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. And you see the unity being talked about there, and God's sovereignty is all over creation, and including in our families. And it's something that's that powerful, deserves our time and attention. We must study that and repeat it and see what we learn here. And you'll see again, he says he may be granted that they may be strengthened with power. To deal with our families sometimes, it does take great strength. And to deal with our families, it takes a spirit being grounded and rooted in love, as the scriptures say. To spend time, real time, with our families requires a supernatural strength. And you know what I'm talking about. Each of our families has that one relative, the one that's wanting to be a cage fighter, the one that hunts wolverines in the summer in Alaska. It's that one that we don't really want to talk about. And if you don't know who that relative is, it's probably you. And one time we'll say, I don't have time to spend with those most difficult relatives. But the Spirit says making the intentional time is going to take the help of the Spirit. And with that, when the Spirit is involved, it's not a natural power, it's a supernatural power. And you might say, I don't like them. The Spirit doesn't care, and the scriptures don't have something that says you got to like them. It says that we must invest time and consider time spent with them to be something that we need to have. And you might say, well, they're just annoying. Well, we all are to a degree, but this is where you let the Spirit work. And this is why spending quality time with the Father is paramount, because that reflects the time that you spend with others. If we are not spending quality time with our Heavenly Father, ladies and gentlemen, then our time with our earthly families isn't going to be quality either. It's fortunate that I have Jill's love language is quality time. And so I have a meter, which is her face, so I can show how much quality time I spend with her. So I can see how I'm doing. But one of the things I learned from a mini family reunion that we took last week is that you must have family meetings. We had 5 families in 4 states, from 4 states and 1 foreign country. And one of the things we did was to sit down with each other and talk about our expectations of that week. Because as you can imagine, with that many families and that many thoughts and that many expectations going on, that someone could have been forgotten. But we sat down and we listened to everyone from the youngest to the oldest, and it was a fantastic time. And I look at the scriptures because a lot of times Jesus had those family meetings too. Before we get to where that comes in Mark, I want to talk to you about the importance of family life, and that can't be understated. If our families fail, then people will fail. If families fail, people will have a much harder time in understanding God and how we can come to Him. And out of that failure, we approach God with a lack of trust, a fear of being hurt, and reservations about community. But when families succeed with the time spent, and that's that quality time, it's easy to see a natural progression to take what we learn from our families here on earth and apply it to the family of God. And that's what Paul was talking about. He's talking about understanding and realizing that supernatural strength that comes from the Spirit. It's every family's responsibility to look like God. Now let's turn over to Mark chapter 3, verse 31 through 35. And this was read during our scripture reading this morning, and I appreciate that as well. Mark chapter 3, verse 31 to 35. Now, this is also repeated in Matthew. This instance is repeated in Matthew 12 and Luke chapter 8. What I wanted to go back and focus on here is that Jesus is surrounded by a crowd, and he's being told that his mother and his brothers have come to talk to him. And what we can find from the context of that is that they may want to talk to him because they may think that he's gone a little bit off the rails, that he's a little bit crazy. But at the end of that little section there, he says, "For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. And not that he's forsaking his earthly family and giving us that example, but he's saying that spiritual ties are stronger than natural ties. And it implies that his mother is no closer to him than anyone else who does the will of God. And how do we know what the will of God is? We spend quality time with God. God's family it's an amazing part. It's an amazing ability to be a part of God's family, I guess you should say. And we all need family. I was stalking, sorry, I meant to change. I was checking in with one of my graduates from the student ministry, and he had put a series of pictures from his from school, and I loved it because what he said at the bottom, he's like, I love my new family here. All of us strive to look and be a part of a family. It's the reason why some of us have rushed fraternities and sororities. It's the reason why Rudy wanted to play with Notre Dame, or Napoleon Dynamite wanted to join the Happy Hands Club. It wasn't because all the other clubs, sweet clubs, were taken. It's because he wanted to be a part of a family. And that's what we want. In the New Testament, the church spoke of how we could be a part of God's household, both Jews and Gentiles. And those believers were family members. You'll see that in Ephesians and in Mark and in 1 Timothy. Now, if you'll turn to Mark chapter 9, which we also read, we'll see here that Jesus is calling a family meeting. And it's important because he said he knew that the apostles were discussing something. And he wanted to bring that out and not only find out what they were discussing, or not find out. He knew what they were discussing. He wanted them to look at what they were discussing and how he needed to turn that on its ear. Take a look at that again. That's chapter 9, verses 33 through 37. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent for the way that they argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down, he called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and a servant of all. And he took a child and he put him in the midst, and taking in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who seeks me. Jesus exalts children because they don't have a lot of power. They're not necessarily successful at that point. But he wants to teach us how to become a part of a new family. Those old families and those old ways, the arguments about who's the greatest, Jesus says we can't have any part of that. Children are dependent and relatively powerless. They teach us from becoming small so that God's kingdom can become great. And when this happened, a whole new set of relationships is born out of the Spirit. And in Jesus' new family, things are not the same. People are more valued than possessions. And love for our biological kindred gives way to serving everyone around us, even those that are most unlike us. Again, it's not a natural power. It doesn't come to us naturally. Through the Spirit, it comes through us supernaturally. And that's what's so great. Time spent with God's family bolsters our natural families with honor and strength. And we find out that widows and orphans are cared for, and that husbands learn self-discipline and self-sacrifice, and wives are honored as co-equal heirs of salvation. And the result is that our natural families will be as God originally intended. Here's a surprise. We're going to look at our hymn book. Page 744 is a song called God's Family. And if you haven't been there in a while, thanks, Robin, for all your worship songs. These are the hymns that we used to sing. I'm just playing, Robin. He's not here, so I can say that. 744, I want you to look at verse 2 and the chorus, because I think that this really captures a lot about what it means to be a part of God's family. When a brother meets sorrow, we all feel his grief. When he's passed through the valley, we all feel relief. Together in sunshine and together in rain, together in victory through his precious name. And sometimes we laugh together, and sometimes we cry. And sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven, God's family. I remember that from growing up. I love that hymn. And that brings us again to the title of today's sermon. And in case you're one of the 3 people that reads the bulletin, it says, Manna from Above, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Time with My Family. It's a little play on Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. But I felt like family was better than loving bombs. But the time we get with our family is truly special. It's miraculous, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. So let's not let any time go by. When your mom calls you to ask you to spell something, take that time and spell it, even though she has Google at her hands, even though she has a bunch of dictionaries. I relish in that time. I take that time to do that because, again, the time that we have to spend with our earthly families and the time that we have to spend as a church family is indeed special for us. I have a handout that I will give, that I'll have made available because it does have some homework for you. But this is something that I wanted to read. It's a prayer from the Valley of Vision, a collection of Puritan prayers and devotions. And some of you may actually own that book, but there's a special prayer in it that talks about the family. And I wanted to quote it to you from here, a little bit of it. The prayer says, "Help me to hate and forsake every false way, to be attentive to my condition and character, to bridle my tongue, to keep my heart with all diligence, to watch and pray against all temptation, to mortify sin, to be concerned for the salvation of others. O God," and I love this, "O God, I cannot endure to see the destruction of my kindred. And let those that are united to me in tender ties be precious in your sight and devoted to your glory." And so one of the things I want us all to do this week as a family is on the other side of that handout, you'll have a place to fill out certain things. And what this says at the top, it says, after you work on this worksheet independently, you'll schedule a family meeting and actually meet with members of your family, extended family, church family, adopted family, and discuss and make sure snacks are involved because we all love food involved here. Number 3, it says 3 things that we've enjoyed as a family this year. Write those down. 2 activities we'd like to do together next year, Lord willing, and then 1 family tradition I love. So I'm not telling you what type of the family that you have to meet in, but definitely do that this week. That's something that I want you to do, and that's something that I think that we're called to do, to every now and then take some time to spend that quality time with those that God has put in our lives. And this is an invitation then I offer to all families. If you want to share your successes or trials of your family, we're going to offer a time for you to do that right now. And if you'd like to be connected to God's family here, to look around and be a part of what we have here, we'd love to have you do that too. So I hope just in these brief remarks, you're able to understand how not only in the Word, it's been told to us, we've got to spend time with our families. We've got to make that intentional time to do that. But to show that not only our earthly families are important, but our heavenly family is as well. We're all God's children, and that's a wonderful place to be.